if I can bring an analogy, when, at least in Ecuador and in my time that I've been in business, I would say 19 out of 20 people I interview do not do a basic job of preparing themselves. They do not research the company. They do not research who they're meeting with. They just come in and they wing it. And if they're lucky, they impress you, but most likely not. And so the first thing would be the same. If you're going to a customer meeting, do the basic due diligence on who you're meeting with, both as a company and as people.
I know you've been like 25 years working in different roles as a founder, as an investor. So, what personal story besides what you're doing right now would you be comfortable sharing so that people can get to know you better?
Sure. So the story that I like to share, which brings us back to why we do what we do and why I do what I do, is I come from an immigrant family. Three of my four grandparents immigrated to Ecuador late 30s, early 1940s. And particularly my grandfather on my father's side, he was an electrical and electronic engineer. He specialized in building radios at the time, and he was one of the founding fathers of the radio network in Ecuador. And he had a core belief, a philosophy that a country that does not develop its own technology will be dependent to other countries and will fall behind to being a third world country and not become a developed country. So with that aspect in mind, for most of my life, even though I've been in B2B sales and design, build data centers, and some sophisticated solutions, but most of my life I've been selling third-party solutions, integrating solutions, be it hardware, be it software. And with going back to my grandfather's philosophy, one of the things that excites me the most from about Xponential is that what we've done the last 3, 4 years is develop our own technology with our team here in Ecuador, technology that is currently focused on the Ecuadorian market, but we do sell a bit into other markets, Colombia, Bolivia, Mexico, Costa Rica. And with that belief in mind, that one of the ways to help our developing countries is to develop technology and to be able to export know-how, not only bring it in from other countries.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And wow, what a powerful belief. And as we're all about beliefs. So, tell me a little bit more about Xponential itself. Imagine that you're explaining it to a friend of yours. So, what does Xponential do?
When we talk to customers, there's two macro motivators for them. One is always uptime, going back to being the business needs to run, it can't stop. But the second part is efficiency, cost cutting or cost control. So in that sense, we try to understand the different pain points with the customers. And what we're building is solutions that maybe it's not available for them, and that what they're able to do is, and that's where predictive comes in. Right now, everybody, it's not enough just to have a preventive maintenance or to be able to receive real-time alerts when there are events with the equipment. But what
Yeah.
customers want is for them to be able to have total visibility of what's going on and be predictive or take preemptive action in terms of what can occur. So let me give you maybe an example. Last year in Ecuador, we experienced some long lasting outages, 4 hours, 8 hours, even 14 hours a day. And that, obviously, the country, I think no country's ready for that, but the customers weren't ready either. And most customers really suffered because their electrical backbone wasn't ready for this kind of pressure. Particularly to give you a very simple example, uh, their diesel generators. Generators need to have maintenance every 100, 200 hours, and that usually is maybe every 6 months. During these outages, it became every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. So where we come in is we're able to provide real-time data for them to make smart decisions. So, for example, how many hours has that generator been working? What's the real-time percentage of fuel that you have? either in your main tank or in your reserve tank? Do you need to fuel up? You have a couple days. Is the battery at in a good state? Can you trust your battery so that the generator turns on? There's a heater that needs to be at a certain temperature. Is that heater providing that temperature? Or when you need the generator to turn on, it's not going to turn on because that preheating temperature is not there. So
Okay,
what
okay,
we're
got it.
doing is providing remote monitoring and in real-time visibility so the customers can be proactive.
Ronnie, when you talk about predictive, I got something from you. What's the end goal of the predictive? Is it that you're going to have an outage in an hour? What level of predictive do you want to get to for customers?
So there's two angles why predictive is important. The first, and it goes back to what I mentioned before about these two macro motivators for the customer. The first one is uptime. If you know that let's use the same example, your generator is being used at a pace where probably in the next, say, month or so, you're going to have problems because one of components going to fail, then you can act accordingly and probably reduce the risk that generator not working, and then certain operations, say for example, a supermarket chain cannot turn on their cash register, their POS services, because there's no power to be able for the systems to work. So one is providing higher certainty and reducing risk of that operation it's not gonna go down. It's gonna be up. It's gonna be up and running. And the second part is economic. Traditionally, if you look at most of the traditional vendors in, say, generators, air conditioning, UPSs, whatever mission critical equipment, usually there's the way of doing business is by doing preventive maintenance. So you do preventive maintenance visit every 3 months or so because that's the way it's been done. But it's not necessarily the smartest way. By being predictive, by having the data, you can now know exactly when you need to perform these maintenance. So you can reduce the amount of visits from your supplier, from your service company, and just act when you need to do, and not just do it because that's the way that it's been done before. So it can provide also economic benefit by not necessarily having a large amount of preventive maintenance visits, but acting when you need to do.
Where does AI come in under this predictive prevention? I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
AI is key to this because it helps us analyze the data. And as every time, every day, every minute, we're gathering more data, we can use this data to analyze and also compare one system to another. And it helps us provide actionable dashboards, actionable data that can give us with a good percentage of certainty what's probably going to happen or what risks are at hand. AI makes us smarter, just it gives us our computing capacity, makes it exponentially smarter.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So let me see if I understood correctly. If we would have to paint this picture about your ideal customer, it's companies or industries that have heavily invested in lots of hardware that are operating sometimes even 24/7. You just gave me the example of the supermarket, right? They have so many things plugged in, and it's very tedious task to actually make sure that things are always running in the right way. And what you do for them is help them by plugging an external remote device that's pretty much independent and extracting all this data from them. You help them be ahead of any possible interruptions that they could have. Is that somewhat it?
Yes, and let me give you a different example, which I think it's gonna make it even more clear of why there's traction behind providing remote monitoring. Let's talk about a hospital or a clinic. In a hospital or a clinic, you have two very large and important segments that we talk to people about. First one is continuity, say, behind the operating rooms. You need to know that if there's a patient there and there's a power outage, that you can continue the operation. that the surgery you won't have a blackout in the middle of the surgery. So all of your electrical backbone, but also your air conditioning, the climate backbone needs to be operational with the highest level of certainty. You cannot have risk there because an outage during a surgical procedure probably means that the patient could die and the stakes could be higher. The second is all these clinical and medical facilities have these high value components, these chemical reactors that need to be stored at certain temperature. And we had the case in one hospital in Ecuador where they couldn't get their electrical systems running, and the people at the facility were really scared because at that point, if you could not keep at a certain temperature those reactors, they could lose up to $400,000 just because they could lose their cold chain. So
Is that in one day or over what
Yeah.
time period?
that would be immediately because they have
400,000. Okay.
they have in stock $400,000 of chemical reactors that they need to use for one purpose or another. And if you lose the cold chain, the security of the cold chain, they could lose, most of it could go bad or all of it could go bad. So that's the criticality of the application. Not so much the equipment that we monitor, but the applications behind it. A supermarket being able to invoice and have their checkout for their customers. A clinical facility that has either high value assets or patients' lives. Those are the type of applications that we're looking at.
That definitely gives a great picture because hospitals are in the saving life business at some extent, and because anything can happen, and if your backup operations are not in great conditions, which you wouldn't, many times you just don't know, then you figure out that something's wrong and you cannot do anything about it. So you're pretty much giving them a heads up to make sure that their equipment is always running fine. That's what you mean by peace of mind, right?
Yeah. And having the visibility, being able to in real time look at your equipment and say, okay, the equipment's fine. Or even if the equipment is still running, but there are certain criteria, certain indicators that are throwing up yellow flags, not even red flags, but are moving away from the norm, that you can have that information well ahead of time and not having to play a fireman and put out fires, but trying to be ahead of that possible incident.
Wow, sounds great. And I love the fact that you shared right now you're living your grandfather's belief, right? You're pretty much doing everything. You're building a new technology. So that's amazing. So I want to step a little bit back from knowing the business. I think now everyone has a clear understanding of what it is, and talk a little bit more about the sales angle. So this past year, 3 months, have you tried anything that really worked for you or something? You've had a vast experience, more than 25 years in sales. That means that you've tested lots of things, changed lots of things, and maybe something was active when you were, we could say, a traditional businessman, perhaps, and now as a startup founder yourself, lots of things have changed, I'm certain. And I just want to talk about one in this last year. Is there any one thing that was really useful for you that you'd like to share?
Well, I think there's more than one because of activities, or it's a change of mindset that provides a chain of activities towards improving the sales cycle. Just from the beginning, being able to prepare ourselves much better for a sales meeting, even before we talk to the customer, researching who we're going to talk about. In Ecuador, I don't want to judge if it's for better or worse, but the reality is that all information is public here, all financial information. So you can go into the Chamber of Commerce and just download the financial information and all the legal information, all the history from the customer that you're going to visit. So you can go into the visit and know a lot about your customer, even before you step the foot in the door or you have your first Zoom call with the customers. And I would say that it's not that common for people or companies to be well prepared and do that. So that's definitely something that we're doing much better. And by knowing that, it helps us set an agenda and share that with the customer. So go into the meetings and share the agenda with the customer and have them jump on how we're going to manage the meeting, have an agreement between the parties on how we're going to manage the meeting, and managing the meeting or controlling the meeting through open-ended questions to really understand their beliefs, trying to align our beliefs with their beliefs, trying to understand what's the real pain and why they're interested to talk with us, both from a corporate perspective, but also with the people that we're meeting with. What are their personal pains and how we can be helpful to them? And then I would say, usually with enterprise customers, it's more than one meeting, but it's this chain, this methodology, which for us has been very valuable, working with the customer for them to build their own return on investment scenario and having them outline how they value in monetary terms the pain that they're going through. And if we would offer our solution, how that would provide a direct return on investment, something that they could eventually take up to a board or even an internal meeting and present the solution. So I would say, as I said, it's not one particular thing, but it's a mindset of how to go into the different meetings.
And how, so I heard lots of things. First of all, and maybe one of the most important things is you said you're really into getting prepared for the meeting, like beforehand, having information about them. I'm sure you also said open-ended questions, so I'm sure a good chunk of it is also like making sure that your team has a plan of what's going to happen, a set of questions they want to use to be able to get to this pain discovery. Is that the way you also get prepared?
Yes. For some people, selling can come more naturally. I don't think I'm that quick on my feet. So I need to prepare myself better for the meetings. I need to have questions outlined. And then obviously during the meeting, have the versatility to move from one place to another and guide the meeting towards we want to take it. But part of that preparation is thinking about what questions we need to ask and role playing how the meeting can go about and looking at different scenarios. So trying to leave as less as possible to chance and as much as possible to preparation.
Everything's interesting, but it all boils down to maybe the simple thing you said first. There was a big mindset shift. So what would you say that mind shift change was? How could you tell us before it was like this and now it's like that?
What usually comes about is you go into a meeting and you just up everything, all your features and benefits and presentations, and you're doing 80-90% of the talking versus preparing ourselves better, going to meetings, trying to have the customer talk most of the time, guiding the meeting through open-ended questions. So it's the mindset shift is from just being a features and benefits talking machine to being a lot more open to listening and understanding where we can, and also trying to figure out if we are interesting to them, interesting to them as a supplier, but also trying to figure out if they're interesting customers to us, if we want to pursue this relationship, if this makes sense at the time that we're investing into it. So I would say doing a lot more listening than talking. That would be the biggest mindset shift.
I love what you said, feature and benefits selling machine. I think I couldn't say it better.
Ronnie, how would you kind of describe your sales culture now?
That's a great question, Jeremy, because our sales culture is going, it started with what we did with you guys, and it's still in a transition phase. We're incorporating this belief-based selling with a lot more process now. And that process includes building what we call a revenue engine. So this revenue engine is based on establishing 3 clear funnels. One is a prospect funnel, one is a nurture funnel, and then the third one is a cross-selling and upselling funnel to existing customers. And we, one of the questions that or one of the matters that we had discussed previously is filling up the funnel. And I think that has been one of our weaknesses. So right now, with this concept of a revenue engine, the idea is to be able to reach out to a lot more people. So use technology, use AI, use automation tools
Right.
to reach out a lot more people to help bring awareness to a lot more customers, and not just having a founder-led lead program, which basically until still today, most of the leads that come into the company are leads that come in through my own personal network and the network that I built throughout many years. That's also starting to change, and we expect it to be up and running in the next 2 to 3 months. Obviously, there's going to be a learning curve and a lot to learn there. But what we want to change is from this, that I'm the bottleneck in the company right now. If I don't bring leads, then we hardly get leads, versus just a systemized process of bringing leads into the different funnels.
That was very interesting, Ronnie, because you speak of a challenge you have right now, and you said, okay, I want to transition from references and maybe even deeper personal references to a system that starts working by itself. And that's why I understand that you're implementing this whole setup that will help you talk more frequently about the important stuff, right? So not only is Xponential an interesting company, but it's also has something to say, right? And that will get people talking about you, so that whenever they hear about you, you're no longer explaining yourself from scrap. Could that be some form of what you're trying to achieve right now?
Absolutely. One of the things is there's a concept called sharing good news. And it's basically constantly making ourselves known in the market, reaching out to different influencers, be it chambers of commerce or trade shows or whatever it is. But building what we're doing right now, our strategy are for the next month, I would say during the month of August, we've identified clearly who our ICP is. So is owning the database of absolutely 100% of our ICP. That means every customer and then every person within that customer. And that's where AI and automation tools come in. So there's tools that where we build the database, and there's different steps. Once you gather the data, there's tools that you can use to clean the data to make sure that those emails, those phone numbers are verified. And then we can do a more massive reach out. And that's where we start getting a lot more feedback and a lot of more conversations coming in. So part of that is, with the database that we're building, is being able to share constantly good news with our customers or our potential customers in terms of implementations that we've done, success stories, technical developments, anything that can be good news. And we're also incorporating what we call a bad news sniffer, which means if in the market today it's easy to understand or it's easy to learn about if something went wrong. Right now in Ecuador, for example, one of the biggest banks just had a terrible issue with their systems crashing. So that was an easy one to sniff. But if that's happening, then you take that piece of information and you run to companies that could be in the same sector or could have similar issues, and share what we could do for them to help them try to reduce the risk of what already happened to one of their competitors.
Are you using technology to sniff, or how are you like finding these trends, or in essence, can you use AI and technology to be a predictive sniffer?
The
Like,
question, I think it's a new idea that we're incorporating. It's in the works. I would say, to respond to your question, I would respond to two parts. The first one is, right now we're not using a lot of technology. Right now it's just having everybody aware of what's going on, and then share that internally. Because one of the things that we're doing is we've improved the communication inside the company. because it's not always the sales team that needs to be aware of this, but if somebody in our technical team hears from something that they can share with the sales team in time. But going back to your question, Jeremy, even though we're right now more man-powered, I think technology can definitely help. And the initial step towards using technology is taking advantage of the different LLMs. Say if you want to learn of what's happening in social media, using Grok to scan X is a great way. Or similarly, using the tools from Meta to scan Facebook, WhatsApp, and even Instagram, it's a great way. So there's definitely ways to automate that with AI, and that's what we're working towards.
Okay, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that without hopefully losing the human ingredient that you guys have. You wear many hats as a CEO, one of them being sales. What's the hardest part of sales for you?
The hardest part of sales has been long sales cycles that we've experienced with enterprise customers. We're still in the, I don't know if this is it's as rare as I think, or it might be more common. We have we're very strong in closing rates. So we're strong to close a project, but once a project has been awarded a budget, where we struggle the most is converting the customer from a stage where they have very strong interest, they love or they need what we're doing, but they can't figure out to either to how to prioritize this need or how to, and basically have the company award a budget for this opportunity. Once there's a budget in, we're very good at closing those opportunities. But I would say, going directly to your question, for me, the most part in sales is the long sales cycle, especially converting an opportunity or a qualified lead into an opportunity that has a budget assigned.
Sure. So sometimes when we think about these big stories that we want to share to our team about what worked or what not, we normally have this story, which we always go back to. And I don't know if you have anyone that you'd like to share about what you should do or what you should not do based on something that actually happened.
Yes, I think there's a lot of stories there, and I can share both of what worked and what hasn't worked. And I think overselling in general doesn't work. One of the things that we want to do a much better job is understanding as fast as possible if this is truly an opportunity and there's budget behind it and interest behind it, or if it's just people trying to be nice and keep the conversation going, and but it becomes just something that never closes. So I think that's what hasn't worked. The fact that we go into, even though we interact with many people, um, we should do a much better job of setting either KPIs or some sort of red flag in terms of timeline. If this does not convert to an opportunity with a assigned budget, then we need to leave that or put it in the back burner. I think that's something that hasn't worked and that we could do a much better job. And what has worked is talking to customers where you truly find uh, that you sit with a customer, you share what we can do for them, and it's immediate aha moment. They look at you like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. Now I can go to sleep with a lot more peace of mind because I know that either I can predict what's going to happen, or even if there's an event, I can react to it as quickly as possible and not having to become a major episode and major losses for the company. So, and for example, we work with a company that they do um, sampling of air, dirt, and water testing for the quality. They work with oil companies and gas companies and so on. And for them, if they have an outage in their process of validating the quality of these samples, it can be very hurtful for them because they need to comply with deadlines with these very large companies. And they rank among the most reputable and most expensive in their field. So for them, their reputation is key and they don't want to miss deadlines. So that's why we're valuable for them. And for them to being able to keep their process going is something that is of high priority. Understanding, working with the customers and understanding their particular scenarios and how we can be helpful for them, that has worked. And that has made us relevant to them.
Now, to be able to do that, how do you do that? More thinking about giving whomever's listening one or two advices on how to approach this in such a way that it works for them as well. What would you tell them?
I think we go back to this change of mindset and the methodology. First of all is be mindful. If I can bring an analogy, when, at least in Ecuador and in my time that I've been in business, I would say 19 out of 20 people I interview do not do a basic job of preparing themselves. They do not research the company. They do not research who they're meeting with. They just come in and they wing it. And if they're lucky, they impress you, but most likely not. And so the first thing would be the same. If you're going to a customer meeting, do the basic due diligence on who you're meeting with, both as a company and as people. I would say that's the first piece of advice that has worked. More than advice, it's experience of what has worked for us. And the second part is, especially going with enterprise customers, is once you develop some rapport and you have a relationship going, is having the customer build the return on investment scenario and not have it, even if we could do it by ourselves, not bring that piece not bring that already done to present it to the customer, but dedicate a little bit of time, maybe prepare a structure so that the customer can build can build their own math and build their own return on investment.
Great. So you just said that's something very important because that's one of the things we typically teach within Be Singular through a principle, which we say, make them do the math. So in this case, if I understand correctly, instead of presenting them an extensive research or PowerPoint presentation or Excel presentation about how much money your client are going to make, which is a typical approach, honestly. When you say that you're going to make them do the calculation, how are you approaching that? How has this changed from showing a PowerPoint presentation?
It changes just in how you deliver it, because
Okay.
when we go into the process with them, we have already done the work ourselves. So it's not that we go in there and we wing it and we hope that the numbers are in our favor. We do research before that, so we have our own cases that we can benchmark to, similar companies in the industry, maybe in other countries, that we can always fall back to and say, hey, look, this is what's going on in these type of companies. What do you think we can achieve with your company? So we've done the work ourselves. We know where the numbers we want them to lie, or we think where the numbers could lie. And from there, where the numbers can amount to. And from there, guide the process for the customer to build their own numbers. But again, we do the work beforehand and we do a research beforehand. So we reduce the risk of just the numbers not work in our favor.
Okay, so Ronnie, you just said something very interesting, which is how you're doing it. And I'm just going to repeat it back to you. You said, first of all, you're going to get prepared. So you're not going to go there, fingers crossed, show them some numbers, show them some price, and hope they take you. You're actually first making sure it makes economic sense from your standpoint. You have some ideas on what that would work for them, and you have lots of questions so that they can figure it out themselves. Would that simplify it at some extent?
Yes, because you cannot just go there and say, okay, let's work out the numbers. You need to provide the framework and the questions for them to say, oh, okay, and sometimes it's going to come out to, I never thought about this, or I need to go back and do some research. For example, a typical question would be, okay, what's costing you guys per hour, per day, an outage in this process? And most companies don't know. So either they need to prepare for a next meeting, or we need to figure that out. But when you do the numbers with the customer, most of the time the customer doesn't know the information that we're trying to try to build with them. It's if they would know that, they would be much further ahead in both in their automation process and for us in the sales process.
Okay, great. That's super great advice, and that's something definitely that we really believe in, which is making them do the math. Why? Because something very funny that Jeremy says all the time, people will argue with your logic, but not with themselves. So if I had to ask myself, like, why does that work? It's because when you ask them the questions and you figure it out with them at some extent, it makes a complete difference. So thanks again for sharing your thoughts about that. It's pretty much interesting. Jeremy, you want to do a lightning round?
Yeah, I do. So 1 word answer, 2 words, 3 words, maybe a quick sentence, whatever you want. Favorite sales hero? Who's your favorite sales hero?
Can't think of one.
Okay. That's okay. Favorite sales book?
I would say right now, the one that comes to mind to me is called the Revenue Engine, just because that's what we're doing.
Good.
That's what we're implementing.
Cold calling?
Hey,
Okay. Biggest reason salespeople fail?
no trust.
No trust. Okay. Favorite question you like to ask on a sales call?
If you would have a magic wand,
Good one.
what would this look like?
Great question. Okay. All right. That's it for me in terms of my quick lightning round there.
Okay, Ronnie, so pretty much wrapping up some things I heard you say, and you can add, obviously, if I missed something out. First of all, you've been 25 years in selling. You've had different hats, and one of the challenges that you feel today is like, how do you go beyond yourself as a founder as well, and to get a system up in place, up and running within your company, right? And the way you're approaching it is like you're leveraging yourself with AI, this whole concept of revenue engine, just to get more conversations going, so that whenever people hear about you, you're not new. And you said something specific, right? You're using this whole philosophy of sharing good news, and you've instrumentalized yourself to it, right? You have your sniffer of bad news, your sniffer of good news. But the difference between now and then is that now Xponential has something to say. And that's fascinating. And you also shared some very interesting things. You shared a belief change, which we say, or a mindset change, the going from being prepared to do the same thing every single time in every single call, to actually having a listening mindset, a probing mindset, and pretty much getting prepared every time you get to a call to make the proper questions and to know who you're talking to, have a return on investment calculations, to know what you're going to be asking them, and making sure, like, always be prepared, like in some Boy Scout fashion. So would that be a right summary of what important things we share right now?
I think that's an accurate summary.
So to everyone that's listening, is there any specific advice you'd like to give them? Any one other thing that you'd like to share with them so that they can consider whenever they're thinking about challenging their sales process?
I would say just what you ended with, having a sales process. We didn't
Okay.
have a sales process. And whatever it is, I'm sure there's obviously better ways to do it, but at least start with a sales process and keep improving that sales process. For us, it was, and that's what we're doing still, is developing that sales process.
Amazing. Ronny, thank you very much for being here. Jeremy, a pleasure as always to be co-hosting this with you. And for you that's listening, we'll see you next time.